Welcome. À nouveau. I'm sorry I rushed you. We're going to present Mr. John Lowe, who is going to be our future congressional candidate is our candidate, of course, and the Republican Party even wrote to me, and I'm sorry, I'm a little tired, but exactly, he's our future, and he is our congressional candidate for Delaware in the U.S. Congress. Welcome, and we want you to win. You must win. You'll be a pride of the Republicans overseas.
With that introduction, Randy, I cannot help but win, and I will win for Delaware and for Republicans overseas. So
thank you very much.
It's a done deal.
Very good. And you'll have the pleasure of welcoming the Dream Team, right? The Dream Team is somewhere here, right? They're coming, and we're going to have a great panel. Okay? Thank you very much, and you're going to do a great job for us now for this panel.
Thank you very much, Randy. Okay, welcome back, everybody, and welcome to this third session. During the first two sessions, we heard a lot about the problems facing us, about threats to freedom, frankly, about threats to Western civilization as we know it. Let's not be too melodramatic, but I think that's really where we are. So what do we need to do about it? Frankly, what we need to do is we need to win elections. And that is what our next panel is going to be talking about. Earlier this week, we had some elections in the United States. The Republicans actually didn't do badly. It was close. A little disappointment in probably the most closely watched state, Virginia, but we did a lot better than expected. And frankly, we are expecting to do a lot better in 2024. And to look at the aspects of how that's going to happen, I'm going to ask David BOSSIE and KERRY LEWANDOWSKI to come to the table, and they are going to discuss they're going to discuss how we go about winning elections. And I think they're going to start by looking at what I will call the intellectual, the philosophical underpinnings of what needs to happen, what candidates need to bring to the table. And then they're going to look very much at the practical aspects, how you go about winning elections. Because in order for us to protect our society, to protect our future, and to make the world a better place, we need to win elections. They are going to have a bit of an interactive session here. They will entertain questions from the audience. They have asked me to warn you that the questions they will entertain should be short and direct, that they will answer them. But before letting them get going, let me just introduce them very, very briefly. I think you may know them already. But David BOSSIE is a former, very active in an organization called Citizens United. Those of you who follow this U.S. Supreme Court may know about the Citizens United case, which actually opened up freedom of expression to corporations in the United States. It was roundly criticized at the time, but it's actually well accepted now. He is also the Republican chairman for the state of Maryland and a member of the National Committee, and he is very active in campaigns, and he was very active in the Donald Trump campaign of 2016. And he works with KERRY LEWANDOWSKI, who has his own consulting firm, and Mr. Lewandowski has also been very active in presidential campaigns, working with Mr. Trump in 2016, and frankly with Mr. Trump right now. And both of them worked very heavily on the recent gubernatorial contest in the state of Louisiana. So I think without further ado, I'm going to pass the microphone to KERRY LEWANDOWSKI and David BOSSIE, and they will start. And again, questions are welcome, but again, short and direct and to the point. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for having us. And as we just get started, is he on? We have a special guest who wanted to call in. So he's actually on the phone right now. And if I could, I'm just going to hold it up. And Mr. President, if you would like to address the Republican Overseas group, now's the time, sir.
Is there. KERRY LEWANDOWSKI has been my friend for a long time and one of the most capable people in politics. politics ever. And likewise, Dave BOSSIE, who's they're both really good friends and real warriors. And that's what we need today, because the corruption in our country is terrible, and nothing is going right for our country. Nothing's gone right for a period of about 3 years. We were energy independent. We were respected all over the world. I don't want to say feared, because who would want to use a word like that? But there are those people that say feared. We had no problems. Iran was very good to us. They weren't going to do a thing. Russia was never going to go into Ukraine. You look at the attack on Israel, that wasn't going to happen, and now we have a mess. Every single thing that can go wrong. We have inflation at a level that we haven't seen in 79 years. We have the economy is horrible. It's a terrible situation unless you're looking to get elected as a Republican. I think the Republicans are in great shape. Poll numbers have just come out. I'm sure David and Corey have gone over some of the poll numbers. I think probably you should, but I'm leading in every swing state, and we're leading by a lot, both against the Republicans. Against Ron DeSanctimonious, we're leading by about 65 points, and against crooked Joe Biden, I call him crooked. I took the word away from Hillary. We call Hillary now Beautiful Hillary, because she's irrelevant. And we call Joe, rather than Sleepy Joe, which was a very accurate term, but I think crooked is even more accurate. And we're leading him in every state, every swing state. David, I guess you saw that. And the polls have been very strong. But they're really strong for a reason. They loved the 4 years that we had. We had the greatest economy in history. We cut taxes more than any president in history. Regulations, likewise. We did things that nobody ever. We totally rebuilt our military, by the way. And we were respected like nobody was ever respected. Our country was respected at the highest level. We would have never had an Afghanistan disaster like they had. The way I was getting out of Afghanistan, but we were getting out with dignity and with strength. We would have never, ever, a thing like that, when that happened, that gave Putin the green light to go in and do whatever he wants, because they no longer respected our country. It was terrible. The way they evacuated, the way they, in my opinion, the way they surrendered. So we're in great shape as a party. We have to get in. We have to win. The election's coming up. It's the biggest election we've ever had. We've never had. I used to say that on 2016, and then, and I meant it totally. But this is now the biggest election, because if we don't win this election, we're not going to have a country anymore. They're destroying our country before our eyes, and we're not going to let it happen. So I just want to thank everybody for being great and loving our country, and for being Republicans, and in this case, a lot of young Republicans. And it's an honor to be with you, and you're with 3 really great pros. And 2 of them I know well, and the other one I have a lot of respect for. I know all about them. And enjoy your day and enjoy your life, and let's bring our country out and vote. And it's an honor to be speaking to all of you today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. President. And we're done.
And that's it.
It's a wrap. Look, I don't know how you top that, I'll be honest with you. I don't know how you top that, and nothing we can say matters at this point. So maybe we peaked a little too soon. I don't know. But he is obviously a tremendous, tremendously devoted country, and you can see that in everything he does. So I will say one of the things that I know he would want to have talked about here, and I've talked to many of you about it, is making sure that we identify in every one of your countries Republicans who vote in the United States, who are registered and capable of voting, needs to vote. We need to organize that, because the level of our loss, quote unquote loss, in 2020 was only 34,000 votes in 3 states combined. So if we are able to find Republicans in Israel and in France and in Italy and Hungary and all over the different countries that are represented here. It's important. It is important. It is important not only for the presidential election, but for governor's races and U.S. Senate races and down the ballot in congressional races. So I urge all of you that's what I want everybody to leave with, is thinking about how we focus on that. And that's going to require an organization like this to really lead the way. And I would hope that all of you who could potentially help with it and finance it, because it's going to take a lot of work, but it's possibly the difference. So I just want to start with that. So Corey, hey, I'm Dave. This is Corey. So we didn't even get a chance to start before we got trumped.
Well, that happens sometimes. And look, Dave and I have had the opportunity for the better part now of a decade to travel around not only the United States, but around the world and look at races where we think we can make a difference. And what has been universal, whether it was the Donald Trump campaign in 2016, where the media and the pundits all said we couldn't win, to the 2020 race in Israel, where we were the senior advisors to Benjamin Netanyahu, to the race that just finished in Louisiana for Jeff Landry, the first time a first-time candidate didn't have to go to a runoff in 50 years in the state's history. There's been one common thread across all of those, and it's the investment in data early on and changing the way that the model can actually transpire. And a lot of you heard when Barack Obama won, they wrote a book called Inside the Cave. And it was kind of this data modeling project where they started to parse out individuals based on ideological specifications, socioeconomic status, religion, age, gender, etc. Well, where that was back in 2012 to where we are today is light years ahead. And what we saw, and part of the reason that I believe Prime Minister Netanyahu lost after we won in 2020, he didn't make the investment into that data modeling project. He won on a sheer, effort of force. He's very much like Donald Trump, just a force of nature. But the long-term benefit is what was lost. And so, as Dave and I have had the opportunity to go around the country and around the world looking for good candidates who want to talk about freedom and prosperity and returning the government back to the people, the common thread has been make those investments early. And what we saw in Louisiana, which just happened 3 weeks ago, that election, just 3 weeks ago, we saw a candidate who invested early in data and allowed us to run a very specific program so that the individuals who voted for Donald Trump in both 2016 and 2020, but don't traditionally show up in the off-year elections, the 2019s and the 2015s, we targeted those individuals. The data just came back. Jeff Landry increased the turnout by 30% from the individuals who don't traditionally vote in the off-year elections. That 30% increase equated to 2 additional points for him at the ballot box, which allowed him to get to 51.66 and avoid the runoff. So as candidates and as organizations, right, and entities, it takes capital investment to put into those data programs. And look, as I've talked to some of you here today, you've said, we get no help from the RNC. We don't have access to the data for the people who are living overseas in our countries that are registered to vote in America. We need that. Look, that data is available. And what Dave said is so right. We changed 35,000 votes in 3 states, and Donald Trump's the president today. We don't have a crisis in the Middle East. We don't have a crisis in Ukraine. We don't have a world that absolutely has no respect for the United States anymore. So those things are available to us, but you cannot wait until Election Day or the week before or the month before to do it. So, what we want to talk through a little bit today is some of those requirements to run a successful campaign, which many of you have done. But our first takeaway, and one that we did very successfully in 2016, was the investment in data and knowing as much about the electorate and the person who's going to be at the ballot box as possible.
So what we really try to focus on is whether it's in individual states, which in the United States we have what we call swing states. Many of you know the nomenclature, but it's the swing states of Georgia and Arizona and Wisconsin and Michigan and Pennsylvania and several others. And you need to hyper focus on them. So we would go in and really try to map out all of those people who are potentially going to vote for Donald Trump. This is in 2016, and they carried that over into 2020, obviously. I mean, Donald Trump got more votes in 2020. This has never happened in the history of the United States, where the incumbent president got more votes than he did originally in 2016 and lost. Okay, it's never been done before. When he hit his number, it should have been enough. And so the Democrats went out and they, we call it they stuffed the ballot box. There's a lot that goes into that, but they were able to go out and ballot harvest, and they did these types of things that were brand new and that no one was looking for or at in the 2020 cycle. Now we see them coming. Doesn't mean they're not going to try to do something different. So we're clearly paying attention. However, the data doesn't lie, but the data is required. So when Corey's talking about the Landry campaign for governor, it's a big state, big population. And what we were able to do is go in and focus and send messages to their phones. Okay, we would what's called geofencing. We would geofence an area. Let's say this conference right here. We could send a message to every single person in this room. We don't know your name necessarily associated with your phone, but we know your IP address because you're in this room right now. And that's how the government does it too, just so you know. But we're able to, makes you feel better. So we're able to take that data and model it against other known entities. So in the United States, we might map that against people who are lifetime members of the NRA, people who are members of Citizens United or the Heritage Foundation or other conservative groups. And so we try to find modeling so that we can build that base of support and then selectively send messages just to them in a highly efficient and cost-effective way, so that we're not spending. You still have to spend the money on television. Spending the money on television, I don't know how it's done necessarily in your country, but in the United States, predominantly messages are delivered through paid television advertising, 30-second commercials and the like. And the new thing over the last 6-8 years has been delivering them to your computer and on your phone directly, which is a much more efficient, much more inexpensive way to do it. And so that's one of the things that we took to Israel and really tried to, and we did that very successfully in that election cycle. If you want to win and you want to win consistently, you have to build a machine and then you have to keep the machine turning. It's not easy. It doesn't happen overnight. It's not fun work either, by the way, but it's the important building blocks that then you can build a winning campaign on. So with that, maybe you want to reflect a little bit on Trump's 2016 campaign, or.
Yeah, so, the 2016 campaign, for those of you who don't remember it, and I think most of you probably do, before the 16 campaign in actually April of 2014, Dave and I were hosting an event in my home state of New Hampshire where I had the chance to meet with Donald Trump the first time. And Dave introduced us to me and Mr. Trump, and at the end of that year, in the December of 14, Dave called me and said, "Hey, do you have any interest in going to New York to meet with Donald Trump? He's thinking about running for president." I go, "Come on. Like, seriously, what are we doing?" And I drove to New York, and before I left New York that day, I was hired as the first employee for the Trump campaign. And we started to build something, and what we saw was not just the desire to have something new. We saw a movement. And Donald Trump, in his infinite wisdom, after Mitt Romney lost the 2012 race, went out and trademarked the phrase, Make America Great Again, the day after Mitt Romney lost. Now, we tried to use that trademark, and the trademark office at the time in 2015 said, well, you haven't been using it enough, so we can't grant you that trademark right. I think we've changed that now, right? Make America Great Again was a message that resonated to different people for different reasons. And it didn't matter if you're a white or black or blue or green or purple or orange. You thought what that meant to you was different than what it meant to somebody else. And it was this overarching theme that Donald Trump didn't run from his wealth, but embraced it. We pulled up places in a brand new 757 giant jumbo jet that said Trump on the side. We took kids on helicopter rides at the Iowa State Fair in a helicopter that said Trump on the thing, right? We showed off the wealth that you can be created in America because at the end of the day, he wanted everyone to be wealthy. A rising tide would lift all boats. And what happened in 2016 is the media missed something. They told us that Hillary Clinton was absolutely, unequivocally going to be the president of the United States. So what did they do for us? They gave us $1 billion of free television. Every time Donald Trump went to do a rally, and we did hundreds of them, CNN, Fox News, covered them cover to cover. And why? Because you never knew what was going to happen. You know, if there was going to be a fight in the stands or Donald Trump was going to ask someone to come up and stab him. Right? That's what happened at these rallies. And we started these rallies with 3,000 or 4,000 people. And on the night before the election in Michigan, there's 35,000 people standing out in the freezing cold, listening to a guy who doesn't play the guitar and can't sing, give a speech for an hour and a half. And it's his third or fourth or fifth or sixth one of the day because Dave did the schedule. And all of a sudden, Donald Trump, who didn't want to say no, and when asked to shorten the speech, Mr. Trump, sir, this will be your fifth one, your sixth one. You have to shorten it. You can't sustain this. He said, these people have been waiting for hours in the cold. I'm not going to shortchange them. This guy was an absolute machine. He never said no. Whatever the schedule was, he never complained. He never said, I'm working too hard. He made a personal investment of his own riches into his campaign. Not because he wanted to be rich or famous. He already had that. Not because he thought that his children needed to have a path for success in the future. He already gave them that. As I sat in that New York office the very first day, he said, if I'm not going to help save the country, who's going to do it, Corey? And I looked at him and I said, why would you want to do this? And he said, because it's our turn. And that was the difference. And it was so authentic and so genuine. And what the media doesn't understand about Donald Trump is how magnanimous he is in private, how self-deprecating he is, how thoughtful he is. You know, I tell the story often that on holidays, Donald Trump will call my home. I still have a home phone line. I don't know why, but I do. Or he'll call my cell phone, and he'll say, hey, are the kids there? I just want to say Merry Christmas, or Happy Thanksgiving, or how are they doing? Right? That's the Donald Trump that the media didn't want to portray. And in 2016, they didn't do that. They didn't characterize him as a crazy right-wing lunatic nut because they never thought he could win. And when he shocked the world on Election Day, they went into overdrive. And we started with the fake Russia collusion narrative, which was 100% bullshit. Not 99%, 100% it never happened. We now know it was made up from Hillary Clinton and her team. We know the FBI not only condoned it, but propagated this thing. And what did they do? They went after the people who were associated with the presidential candidate because they didn't like their politics. The federal government used their badges and their guns to go after people because they didn't want Donald Trump to be successful. And that's why in 2020, the media did everything they could to drive Donald Trump's negatives up and allow Joe Biden to hide in his basement, to not come out, to have rallies that literally had 8 or 10 people at it, and I'm not exaggerating, and say this guy is the most popular person in American history. Give me a break.
Yeah, you got to remember, for us, it's like yesterday, but in 2020 during the campaign, Biden, when he came out of his basement, would go to a rally in Arizona, and they would do it in a parking lot so people could park their cars 20 or so feet apart. And people didn't get out of their cars, and they would honk. Remember this? How pathetic. Donald Trump would have 20 or 30,000 people in an arena, and he would do this multiple times a day. And it's truly, to be honest with you, I think if you could put your finger on one of the reasons that he was able to beat Crooked Hillary, was the sheer ferocity of the campaign. The campaign took on a life of its own because of Donald Trump's fire, because we had a candidate, and this is what I urge you to look at when you're recruiting candidates, when you're talking to people, they have to be willing to do it all. It's, to be quite honest, the difference between Bibi Netanyahu and the next guy. It's the difference between Donald Trump and the next guy. These are people totally dedicated. They're not a little bit invested, they're all in. And that's what matters. And by the way, what Corey was talking about, that genuine article aspect of it, that people organically communicated with President Trump. They think he's talking directly to them, because he is. It could be 20,000 people in the audience, and you feel like it's a message for you. Very few politicians are able to do that. And so, as Corey was mentioning, we used to do one rally a day. And as the campaign went on, in September, I went to then Mr. Trump and I said, "Sir, we're going to want to," because he had a rule. He always wanted to sleep in his own bed. So we would fly to wherever we would fly. It could be Los Angeles, Las Vegas, 3,000 miles away. We would do a rally and fly back to New York, and he would sleep in his own bed every night of the week. And I'd be like, "Sir, it's killing the staff, but we need to do more, not less. So we would like to go from one rally a day to 2, or maybe 3, or maybe even 5 or 6 a day as we get closer to the election." And he looked at me and he was like, "How are we going to do that physically?" And I said, "Well, don't worry about it. We got it. We'll use time zones, and we have time changes. We have an Air Force. You have an Air Force, so we'll just use it. We got it. We'll get in and out of places." And the ferocity of the campaign, you had Hillary Clinton on a decline, right? We had all of these different issues surrounding Hillary Clinton that was taking really the energy out of her campaign, including her collapse and health scare actually on September 11th. And then you had Donald Trump ramping up his campaign, and that energy, that national energy that he created. Because when we were doing 6 rallies a day, which is what we were doing, he would give 6 90-minute speeches a day, every day, okay? No, it's unheard of that he could do that. First of all, I don't know if he could do it anymore. Who am I kidding? He could do it. He could do it. But it is it's the momentum, the energy. It takes on a life of its own. Now, you can't create that. It has to be part of whoever you're supporting has to have that fire, and he or she has to connect with people directly, and people, the audience has to buy in, and that's what Donald Trump has. And to be quite honest, we saw it with Prime Minister Netanyahu as well. He has that just the magic. Okay, I don't know if it's run out. I hope it's not run out. But he has this magic, and he is a man who is meeting the moment, right, in history, in destroying, decimating Hamas, and I hope every other group that wants to raise a sword against Israel. I hope he destroys every single one of them, because without a man like that, it would never happen. And we'd be on to another terrorist attack a year, 5 years from now. The Prime Minister is a special person who has that discipline, who understands what I believe is required at this moment in time. And it takes a special man to be able to deliver the kind of devastation that he's delivering.
He is.
He is. It's an amazing thing, and for us to have been able to work with him side by side, it was incredibly special for us.
Look, there's a couple of things that these winning campaigns all have in common, other than the data, right? Whether it's Trump in 16, Netanyahu in 20, Jeff Landry in 23, the campaign staffs are really meritocracies, okay? Everybody does everything, and it's do it all, and you do it now. You don't have the chance to do it later. Donald Trump wouldn't say, hey, let's do that in 2 weeks from now. Get it done today. And so let me just put this in perspective. In the winning presidential campaign in 2016, on election night, the campaign employed 250 full-time employees, okay? That's in Trump Tower and throughout the entire country. Hillary Clinton had 800 employees just in the Brooklyn office. Just in her Brooklyn office, she had 800 employees. Hillary Clinton blew through about $1.2 billion in 2016. Donald Trump won on $300 million. Why? Because it's not just about the money. It's about the message, the messenger, and it's about the team. And these small teams, these meritocracies, and I was the first employee to be hired on the Trump campaign. We flew around on that giant 757 with 5 people. That was the whole operation. Chris Christie got on the plane and said, where is everybody? We said, hey, this is it. Scott Walker, the former governor of Wisconsin, was in and out of the race in 68 days because he had 70 staffers. And I said, what are we doing? We had a couple of kids who were interning in the Trump Tower, and Trump comes down and says, what the hell are all these people doing here? I said, sir, there's 4 people. He says, yeah, what are they all doing? Because he thought he was paying them. I said, no, they're volunteering. He said, okay, they can stay, okay? But they were opening the mail and trying to return contact to people who want to reach out. And so, look, that's what you have to have. You have to have message discipline, a team atmosphere that you can build. The losing campaigns are the ones that are fighting amongst themselves, where consultant A and consultant B all want to get rich because they think that this is their swan song, okay? If you can't put a campaign team together that is vested in one thing, which is the outcome of the candidate, then you've got the wrong team. And the model that works and the model that should work is that when a candidate is successful, the consultants are successful. When I started with Donald Trump, sat there across from him at the table in January of 2015, and he was at less than 1%, I said, sir, here's what I'm going to propose to you. Every time you win a primary or a caucus in this presidential race, you're going to pay me. My interests are now tied to your interests. And he said, absolutely. Well, guess what? We went on to win 38 primaries and caucuses. It was very good for the Lewandowski family, and he was very happy to pay me every single time because you win. So if you can get people, as you're building a team, who are willing to take a percentage of winning as their bonus, as opposed to making all the money. We've seen it for so long. We have seen it now for 20 years. The consultant class has gotten rich running campaigns, and when the candidate loses, they blame the candidate, and when the candidate wins, they take the credit. But either way, the consultant gets paid. So as you guys are assembling your teams, looking for your candidates, small meritocracies, I would say think about all kinds of money that gets paid into polling, right? We've seen this all the time. All these polls, all these polls, all these polls. You have to pay more money to do some polls. Look, a lot of these polls are already available to the public. They're already being done every day. So as you guys, again, think about what you really need in a campaign, particularly those campaigns that are running against an incumbent here in France, right? Not easy to beat an incumbent president. You better be able to save some resources because at the end you're going to need them. Because that October surprise, as we call it in the United States, that thing at the end of the campaign that's going to come up that you weren't anticipating, you need the resources to pay for it. So I will tell you this. The way you build your team makes all the difference. The professional nature and the meritocracy of your team makes all the difference. The candidate can do a lot, but he can't do it alone. So to assemble that right team with the right mindset and the right incentives get you a lot closer to winning than just putting somebody on there who is a name that really loses most of the races.
And there's a lot of them. It's in the United States. I don't know, in your countries, there's a lot of political consultants. What we urge candidates to do when we visit with them, and we're friends with a lot of them. That's one of the reasons we work for with Andrea. He's a buddy of ours. We care deeply that he won. Same thing with obviously with President Trump. But campaigns have. I actually was in Miami day before yesterday, and I was having breakfast, and a guy running for Congress came up to me and wanted to tell me about himself, and he says, I hired this company to do my digital. I hired this company to do my television. I hired this company to do this. And he lists off 5 or 6 of the biggest political consulting groups. Really, really talented people. And I'm like, you're going to spend all your time managing 5 different consultants, taking your money every month, and you have to figure out what they're doing for it. So Corey and I, what we try to do is, and what we recommend for candidates, whether we help or not, we try to make folks the right team. What Corey was saying, build the right team, not consultant heavy, but individuals who are going to work their fingers to the bone for the mission, for the people that they're working for that candidate, for that ideal. We have ballot initiatives. We have all sorts of things in the United States. You guys may as well. We're running out of that's her saying wrap it up. So it's important. It's just important that you don't build a team that is top heavy, that's taking all of the resources, the campaign. I think she was. I was joking, but I think she's serious. So I'm joking. So you just need to not have it be, folks. That's it. When you're talking to candidates, when they say they want to run for office, urge them to find one and the ability to build it, okay, and then have that person put it together, as opposed to all people who will stand in line to have their hand in your pocket. It's I'm just going to throw this. Let's see if this one works. Okay, thank you. I'm gonna end on that, and I just want to say thank you all. My wife and I, Susan, who's here somewhere right there, we love France. We come to Europe. We bring our kids to Europe. We before we knew about this trip, we took our kids in late July and early August to Italy and to France. We spent time here in Paris. We went to the Normandy coast. We love Bayeux, which is out there by Cannes, and it is an incredible country here in France. And we love it. We come as often as we can, and so we're honored to be, Corey and I are honored to be a part of this conference, and honored to be here visiting with you. We're going to be here for the next little while after this is over, and be happy to talk to anybody individually if they would like, if you have any questions after we get done with the question and answer period.
Okay, thank you very much, David and Corey. That was excellent. We do have time for a few quick questions, so who wants to start? I see a guy in the back. That's you. And then give the mic to the guy next to you. Okay.
Hello, I'm Brice Amar. I'm a lawyer, an EFP auditor, and the vice president of Impulsion Gaulliste. That's a patriotic movement, French patriotic movement. So my question, what is your opinion on proposed electoral reforms such as mandated ID and ballots time-stamped by a blockchain? And how do you think they might impact the electoral process?
So is your question, do I think that we should have an identification requirement to get a ballot?
Yeah.
1,000%. Okay, you can't get on a bus in the United States without an identification, and the left wants to tell us that we're disenfranchising voters because we want the integrity to know who's voting. We don't care who you vote for, but we should know that A, you're a United States citizen because only U.S. citizens can vote, and B, you are allowed to vote in the municipality or the area that you are supposed to be in. So this notion that certain people will be disenfranchised by asking for an identification is absolutely absurd. So yes, ID 100%.
Yes, sir.
Hello guys, Dave KERRY. I'm pleased about what I did here. It's a proof of what is a pro team supposed to be everywhere, behind some presidents, some projects, and so. To be short, I'm from Romania, by the way. We're going to have election next time also. Please come to Romania anytime, if I may. And my question is based on some news that I did read 2 days ago about Zelensky dialogue with Biden, your president, actual president. It was a discussion about elections, about because freedom without election or election without freedom seems to be like a conflict of logic. So the news was like that. Zelensky informed Biden about the fact that did cancel the elections and did propose to Biden, president of your country, to cancel the same for the next year. This is the one question, and the second question is, how deep is your deep state in the state? Thank you.
So the question about Zelensky is, Zelensky informed the world that he
Inform
wasn't
and
going to
ask
have
Biden to cancel also.
to cancel our election.
Yes, your elections.
No,
yes.
no. Well, okay.
Thank you.
I apologize for not hearing that because I don't know that happened. No foreign leader. I don't care who you are. I don't care who you are, who the president is. We don't cancel elections. Okay. I don't care what's going on in the world.
Joe may not know this election, but we're still going to have one.
And Joe may not know what's going on in the world, but the United States doesn't cancel its elections. So that's just it's not going to happen ever, and because that's a core tenet of our country and our democracy. So there'll be no canceling of elections.
Yeah, and the second part is, how deep is the deep state? Look, I'll just tell you this. When Donald Trump came into Washington, D.C. and put his hand on the Bible the very first day, and I've been very critical, we weren't ready to go on day one, okay? There wasn't a team in place. And so what happened because of that, it took months to start to get his people into those government agencies, which are run by bureaucrats who have a mentality of, hey, you guys are renting the building for 4 years, we own the place. I've been here for 30, 40, 50 years, right? We had this guy, you ever hear from Fauci? Right? You ever hear that dude?
80 years.
70 years in the government, 60 years in the government, it's like unheard of.
So, and in a lot of these jobs, they're important jobs to come in and work for a new president, in this case, President Trump. The deep state, they would use national security clearances as ways, oh, Corey, Dave, you can't, hey, we want them to work here, but we just have, it's going to take time to get their security clearances done. And then we say, well, we can't afford to wait. Okay, and then you lose good people because the deep state uses the tools that they have at their disposal to try and defeat our good people going in. So we have to do a much better job in the next transition to be much more aggressive, much faster, and much more organized.
And here's the difference. Dave and I were appointed to a board that oversees the Pentagon, okay? Day one, Joe Biden walked in and fired us both on the spot. Like literally, no game, just actually they had to fire everybody because they couldn't just fire me or Dave because it was too political. So they fired everybody who had been an appointee of President Trump, which the mistake that Donald Trump made was he didn't do that. So they allowed the Obama administration's people to stay in place for 8 years. And these guys would come and be like, oh, hey, we like you actually, Mr. President Trump, so just let us stay. And they go, oh, okay, I guess this guy likes me. And they're killing us every single day. Biden walked in after 40 years of being in the federal government and knew how the game was played. And he said, Lewandowski and BOSSIE, yeah, no chance they're going to oversee the Pentagon. There's no chance these guys are going to stick around. You're both fired. So
that made a good story.
And by the way, I didn't mind. I've been fired before.
We expected it. To be honest with you, we totally expected it. It's not a surprise that Joe Biden wouldn't want us anywhere near his administration. Any other questions? Yes, sir. Right there. Sit in the red tie.
Hello, I'm Zoltan Koshkovic from CPAC Hungary, the Center for Fundamental Rights. You asked for direct questions. I guess this is going to be direct. The American public has voted for a brain-dead senator and a basement-dwelling half-dead person. Something is wrong with American democracy. What is it?
The media. Listen, guys, you've got an adversarial media, if you haven't noticed, right?
fake news.
When the fake news New York Times puts on their front page a hospital that they claim Israel destroyed, right? On the front page of the paper, Israel blew up this hospital. No apology. By the way, all bullshit. Never happened. That's the New York Times, the biggest newspaper in America. And when the fourth largest newspaper in America, the New York Post, runs a story about Hunter Biden's laptop that we know to be true, censored. And if you shared that under the old guise of Twitter, your account was suspended for peddling disinformation. We've seen it. The media is in the tank. Look, the Pennsylvania election, which you've referred to, the U.S. Senate race, right? They had their candidate. They have their candidate in Joe Biden. The media has already decided who the next president's going to be. And I go back to what I said in 2016. They weren't prepared for Donald Trump. They didn't think that he could actually win. They told us Hillary was already the president. So they didn't pull the scams that they pulled in 2020. But now they are fully prepared, and they will do anything and everything, both legally and immorally, to keep Joe Biden in that place.
Yeah, without question. The media is our biggest enemy and adversary. The members of the media, we say routinely on television that they hate Donald Trump more than they love our country. Their hatred and anger comes out in everything they do. And so when you talk about these two candidates that win, it's not that democracy is not broken because somebody wins. It is that the media creates the opportunity for that brain-dead senator to win, who should never have won. But the election was over because the debate that they wanted, the media wanted, was conducted after early voting had already been done. There was I think 800,000 votes in the state of Pennsylvania had already been cast, may even been more, had already been cast before the debate. And if people had seen his presentation, they wouldn't have voted for him. And he just barely won. And we believe it's because of that early vote and the media manipulation of it. So we have a thriving, strong democracy. I despise when the left in our country talks about the threat that we on the right pose to democracy. We are the freedom fighters in our country. We are the ones standing tall for democracy. They would throw it out at their first opportunity to gain power and keep power.
Maybe one more question?
I think we're wrapped.
Okay, there you go. Last one.
Last one.
Hi, my name is Gerald Olivier. I'm a Franco-American journalist and author. Regardless of what we think about what happened in 2020 and the result of that presidential election, I think we can all agree that there were substantial irregularities. So I have two questions for you. Number one, do you expect such irregularities to take place again in 2024? And what are you doing to prevent or counter them? Thank you.
Yeah, so it's a great question, and one that I think, the Republican National Committee and attorneys around the country have looked at now for a long time, right? I was in the state of Pennsylvania immediately following the 2020 election. I was in Philadelphia specifically, and we had to go to get a judge's order signed that would allow us access to watch the ballots being separated from the envelopes. Because once the ballot's separated from the envelope, then they would count that ballot and certify it, but they were supposed to verify the signature on all these envelopes. And what they did was they just separated them as fast as they could so that you could never validate the signatures. We know there was fraud. We know there was abuse. And so, look, I think, and Dave probably doesn't want to tell this story, but I will. The night before the 2020 election, Dave and I were on what's called Air Force One. And we were flying back from Michigan. It was the last rally, and we were on the plane. And Dave was talking to this guy by the name of Jared Kushner, maybe you heard of him, right? And this guy, Jason Miller, who was a senior advisor. And Dave said, fellas, are you guys ready for the fraud that's going to come? Are you ready? Do we have enough attorneys so that we are prepared in these major cities and municipalities to make sure the fraud doesn't happen? And the light bulb basically said, hey, don't worry about it, we got it. There's nothing to worry about. They weren't prepared. They weren't prepared for what was about to transpire and take place. because I don't think anybody anticipated the fraud which was perpetrated under the guise of COVID.
And it's never happened before. So to give them a little bit of defense, they were not expecting something at that scale because nothing at that scale had ever perpetrated itself in the United States in the past. We presidential campaign, we have always had election day operations, okay, what we call EDO. And EDO is where you have lawyers ready to go at a moment's notice, because in a highly Republican voting neighborhood, the polls don't open for some reason. And you have to send a lawyer to court to get a judge to order it to be opened immediately. Or in a place like Philadelphia, where it's predominantly Democrat votes coming in, this is it. They would, you go in, they would keep the polling place open late at night. So you got to close at 7, they would stay open. You'd go in and get a judge's order to close the polling place. That is historically what's been done. Never have we seen drop boxes. This is all because of COVID and the COVID rules that were put in place. So this was partially because of those folks that we call the deep state, but they wanted to defeat Donald Trump at all cost, and that's what they did. There were no rules, no holds barred. So I thank you all. We'd be happy to take more questions and talk to you individually. I appreciate it. Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you, guys.
Devin, if you can hear me, we're done just for you, buddy. Just for you. Okay.
Okay, stay seated, please. We're about to have former Congressman Devin Nunes on, and he's going to speak to us about social media and its manipulation and importance in elections. Okay, welcome everybody. As I mentioned, we now have former Representative Devin Nunes on. Mr. Nunes will be speaking to us from the state of California. He's going to be addressing issues related to social media and its importance in elections, and also how social media is potentially manipulated either by government, by academia, or by the various technological companies. So, Mr. Nunes, we are very, very pleased to have you with us this afternoon. For us, we realize it's your morning, and welcome, sir.
Well, thank you. It's great to be with you. And following up with Dave BOSSIE, I mean, that's a tough act to follow. And I will say, I would have loved to have been there. But one of the reasons that I will not go to Paris is because one of our key partners, one of the key partners that True Social has in the free speech movement, is a company called Rumble. And many of you may not know this, but if you try to get onto a Rumble video in France, they will not let you get on there. So the government of France had made threats to Rumble, and Rumble said, okay, look, we're going to just close out. We're not going to play these games of trying to attack free speech. And so far, True Social does work in France, but yeah, it's a pleasure to be with you all this morning. But I wanted to point that out, and of course, say hello to my good friend Dave BOSSIE. And I think I'll look forward to taking questions from the audience, but just a couple of just kind of brief data points that I think are timely. The first is, let's take the situation it's now went global, but this mass murder that you had, one of the largest terrorist attacks killing the most people in kind of the shortest amount of time in the most savage way that we saw on October 7th in Israel. Now, if you would have told me 15, 20 years ago that, someday in the near future that there would be a terrorist like that attack, number one, I wouldn't think it'd be possible for Hamas to be able to pull something like this off. But second, I would think that people around the globe would be united and that, this is just unacceptable in today's modern age. But instead, what's happened is that we're seeing currently right now, we're seeing protests not only all over the world, but more protests than I could imagine I'd ever see here in the United States of America, and including ability to close down members of Congress's office, some of my former colleagues, members of the Senate. You saw the destruction, or so to speak, of I guess you would call it, graffiti, and at the White House, I think just 2 or 3 days ago. And these protests continue. You saw a Jewish American was killed in Los Angeles by somebody with a megaphone. So this is happening globally. Now, why is that? There was an important poll that I saw just a couple weeks ago that I think is relevant to social media, and that is that kids between the ages of 18 and 25, over half of them thought or believed that Hamas was justified to carry out these attacks. Now, why did that happen? Now, I can only speculate, but I think it is an important point for everyone to understand the kind of the way that at least I view the social media landscape. Let's go through the different platforms. You have of the major platforms. So you have Facebook owned by Meta now. Typically for the people that are over the age of 60. Yes, other people have Facebook accounts, and I'm talking specifically in the United States. I think Facebook is still bigger around the world. I think has a little bit of a younger audience around the world. But for the most part in the United States, it's over the age of 60. People use Facebook to keep up with their family. They don't want to get rid of their account. Then you take the next step down, which I would say would be Instagram. Instagram is like for the 25 to 50-year-old, maybe a little higher. Instagram has a massive audience. I think where Facebook is on the decline, Instagram is fully engaged, and I don't know how much they're growing in the United States, but for sure you see from the ages of 25 to up to 60, people are on Instagram a lot, and it's a platform that people get addicted to. Then under the age of 25 in the United States, you see TikTok. And those are the three, in my opinion, the three major platforms globally. Now you have Twitter, which is now called X. It's kind of got a narrow focus. It's really news and information. I would argue it's also an echo chamber for the left and the right to go in and fight with each other. It was utilized by the U.S. government we've now found this out, and specifically the FBI, as a tool for the left to use to gather intelligence and carry out messages globally that the left wanted to push out, narratives that they wanted to build. But Twitter, for the most part, is, and I think as Elon Musk found out, it's a lot of bots. It does have a beautiful bird with the term tweet that Elon got rid of that is global. So it is kind of that venue that people use to push out a message. I think it's better than it used to be, but it's not the platform that it should be or that it could be. Many people ask, why did I left Congress at the height of my career. Right in the middle of my career, had been chairman of the House Intelligence Committee. I was poised to be chairman of the Ways and Means Committee. And people say, why would you leave when you're getting ready to take over one of the most important committees in the United States Congress after dedicating all that time and energy? Well, the reason that I did that is pretty simple. It's that I was being suppressed, and I had no way to get out of the box that I was in. So I was one of the first members of Congress to actually be shadow banned. I think I was the first member of Congress to be shadow banned where we actually caught the companies doing it. That happened in 2018. at the height of the Russia hoax hypocrisy where I was leading that investigation, where we had exposed the DNC, the Hillary Clinton campaign, the mainstream media, and the social media companies all participating in this hoax. Now, that happens, 2018, it gets worse in 2019, where at one point I was able to use those different venues, specifically Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, to push out some call it the counter narrative. I would call it actually the truth, the real narrative of what was happening. But over time, by the end of 18 and 19, I was having a real problem of getting my message out. To get around that, I started a podcast. I was one of the first members of Congress to start a podcast. I did it weekly. It was audio only. And the podcast really shot up, and I was using my email lists around the country and around the world. I'd email the podcast out, so much so that usually on the weekends, I would be in the top 10. Now, granted, back in those days, there weren't as many podcasts. Now today, there's such a plethora. But I would do it once a week. On the weekends, my podcast would be towards the top. And I was using Facebook, et cetera, to do it. And this was in late 2019 into 2020. This podcast was really effective for me to communicate to my constituents in California, and also for me to carry a message, do great interviews with people and I was able to showcase different reporters, members of Congress, people who typically didn't get a large venue to express the work that they were doing. I could do it on my podcast. My podcast got so big at one point I was able. Then I got onto this company called Parler, which was a startup free speech platform, very similar to Twitter. I was the first member of Congress onto that platform. And all of a sudden, I truly understood what suppression was all about. I knew that I was being shadow banned. I knew I was being suppressed. But all of a sudden on Parler, really a platform that nobody had ever heard of, and it seems like a long time ago, but this was in early 2020, suddenly I was getting, within just a few months, specifically I remember the time frame, it was right around July 4th, because Twitter and Twitter and Facebook, Instagram were shadow banning so many Americans, kicking Americans off these platforms that they were I call it the internet ghetto. They were basically being shoved into the internet ghetto. They had nowhere to go. And this was being led by the Democratic Party, working with the Department of Justice, ironically, that was under the Trump administration, and the FBI, which maybe we'll get into later, which is hopelessly corrupted. But by July 4th of 2020, I am getting double, triple the audience and the interaction on Parler, remember, that nobody really knew of, than I was getting on all the other platforms. Now, keep in mind, I didn't just have like a few people on these platforms. I had, on Twitter, for example, I was well over a million people. I think between all my Facebook accounts, I was well over 500,000 people. And I was getting more on Parler, more interaction on Parler, where I think at that time I had maybe 500,000 followers on Parler. Well, I also then successfully used Parler to put my podcast out, and it continued to grow. Then along comes Dan Bongino, calls me and says, who's a famous American podcaster, now one of the first to actually use that technology. He had been on Parler, or was on Parler, and then he calls me and says, hey, your podcast is doing really well. You really ought to put it on YouTube. You ought to do video and put this on YouTube. So I decided, okay, I'll put this on, we'll try it out. It was a lot of work. It's a lot harder to do video, especially, today, after COVID and all the lockdowns, Zoom, this technology really, and Skype and others, got to the point now where I can talk to you guys in Paris. It wasn't so easy back in 2020. And then to do audio, you could do it from almost anywhere. You could do it via phone. You could hook up. It wasn't a problem. Video there's a lot more to it. So I started doing a video podcast. My first video podcast on YouTube, I thought it did well. I got about 5,000 views. I was pushing it up to Parler and my other accounts, got about 5,000 views. I had no idea what was good or bad. But then the next week, I dropped down to like 700. And then the third week, I dropped down to like 100. Now, look, I have 100 friends and family just in my neighborhood and constituents that they would at least click play on YouTube just to make me feel good so that at least I got a click. And in the same time, my audio podcast continued to increase, but my video podcast was basically where you couldn't even find it. And in fact, you would go to YouTube and you would type in, my podcast has a very unique name, very difficult. It was called, I'm being sarcastic here, but it was called the DEVIN NUNES podcast. So you could go to YouTube, type in DEVIN NUNES podcast, and nothing would come up. Matter of fact, the only thing that would come up were nasty fake news videos about me that would come up on YouTube. So finally, after just, I don't know, I think we did 5, 6, 7 episodes, I just said, look, this is enough. I said, let's just go I told my team, let's find a video player anywhere in the world that will work. Where we can just send it out, the links will work when we email it out. If we put it up on Parler, they'll work. Well, we found this company, it was a small video player company in Canada called Rumble. And so I was actually the first guy when I went to Rumble, Rumble had just started going from a video player to then trying to break into the YouTube scene. And they started that with funny animal videos. So they were uploading funny animal videos and they tried to get a little niche with funny animal videos. So it was funny animal videos and the Devin Nunes podcast. That was all of Rumble. And nobody had it on, nobody had the app, was using Rumble in the United States. Well, long story short, I had about 10,000 followers on YouTube after being on there for many, many years. In 3 weeks, I had 35,000 followers on Rumble, a platform nobody had ever heard of. By election day of 2020, I had nearly 400,000 followers on Rumble, a platform that nobody had ever heard of. By that point, though, Dan Bongino and others figured that out, and pretty soon it became a haven. Rumble became a haven for people to go to, a safe zone for people to go to make sure that they weren't being censored by YouTube. Some people call it ScrewTube, but I won't go there since I'm trying to be professional CEO here of a social media company. Then I think the most horrific thing that's ever happened that doesn't get a lot of attention in U.S. history, and there's been a lot of bad things that have happened here in the United States in the last decade, but I will say I think the very worst thing that happened was when Parler, after the 2020 election, so many people got banned off of Facebook, Instagram, and a lot of people forget this. There were millions of people that were like immediately banned after election day. I know people that had 1 million followers on YouTube that were completely nuked with no excuse. No questions asked. You couldn't get a hold of anybody. People with 1 million followers on YouTube, how they were making their living, were suddenly wiped, obliterated from all of social media. Next came, and so that happens all after the election until finally, I think people in the country, around the country, realized, okay, Donald Trump's going to get kicked off of everything. Wow, where's he going to go to? He's going to have to go to YouTube. He's going to have to go to Rumble and Parler. And now the good thing is that Rumble was ready for this. Rumble had all of their internal networks. They had all their own servers. They couldn't be banned from the planet. Parler, however, and this is what I think is the worst thing that's ever happened, Parler, however, was, of all the bad things that have happened here in the United States, Parler was, their services were cut by some almost 36 American companies, many of the largest companies in this country. And their services were annihilated. And that billion-dollar company was wiped off the face of the planet. So now, here I am in 2021 with no way to get my message out other than my podcast and Rumble, no way to reach the masses. And so I went around the country talking about it. Long story short, Donald Trump didn't have a platform either. He decides that he wants to build one. And then at the end of 2021, he called me up and said, hey, you know a lot about this. Would you leave Congress and come and start this company for me. So I left Congress at the beginning of 2022. We set out to build True Social, which is now, even today, it's the fastest growing social media company in history. Donald Trump has more followers on True Social today than he had on Twitter when he came down the escalators with Melania, what Corey and Dave Bossie were talking about earlier. Came down the escalator in Trump Tower in New York City. He has more followers on True Social today, and that's despite the everyday bombardment of all the fake news saying that how bad True Social sucks. But despite all that, this is a flourishing platform, and what really pisses all them off is we're global and we can't be shut down. So, and that because we're working closely with Rumble, we're on their cloud, we ride on those rails, so to speak, and we built all of our code internal, so there's no outside company that can shut us down. So that's kind of my background. That's why I left Congress, and I'm sure we can get into some Q&A here. But I think what you're seeing today with TikTok and their ability to manipulate people around the globe, especially with this crisis going on in the Middle East, I think you see it really. I think you're starting to see it. I don't have any evidence of this. This is just anecdotal evidence, but I think TikTok is really moving young people around the world to essentially take a horrific terrorist attack and have it be justified by what they're seeing on TikTok. But anyway, I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you all, and hopefully, if you don't do it in Paris next year, if you do it in a country that's more free, I'd love to be there in person.
Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you very much, Devin Nunes. It was a pleasure having you call in and address the audience here in Paris. So I think right now questions, Randy? I think we need to move on to our next panel right now. What? Next. Come on, Kerry. Please, come on, Kerry. Okay. Right now, I'm pleased to introduce Kerry McQuiston. Did I get that right? Okay. Kerry McQuiston is from Oregon. She was a candidate for the governor of Oregon, and she's going to be speaking to us about the importance of grassroots organizations in your campaign organization. Is that correct? Okay. Okay.
Thank you. Okay, how does that sound? Good? Excellent. So I am here today basically to say why the gentlemen who just spoke before me are absolutely correct and what all of that looks like in a grassroots gubernatorial campaign. So I'll just tell you my story. I was raised on a cattle ranch in the northeast corner of the state of Oregon, about an hour from the Idaho state border. And back during COVID, when the entire COVID debacle broke loose, I was raising my daughter. I was running the small business that I started. I was happy, not too far into politics, but I had never seen such a grab for our freedoms in my adult life. And I couldn't stop myself. I had to get out there and actually do something. Now, at the time in Oregon, we had a governor named Kate Brown. Now, Kate Brown was, in my words, a tyrant. The policies that she was putting into place were absolutely draconian, was the word that kept coming to mind. We were one of the first states to close. We were shut down, locked down the hardest, and we were one of the last states to open. Now, in my neck of the woods, we also had a very liberal, left-leaning city council and mayor. And those folks had shut down city council. The meetings that should have been open to the public were not. Everything was closed. Our healthcare workers were told if you didn't get the jab, you were out of a job. We were close enough to a little bit of freedom in Idaho that our businesses were shutting down and moving an hour across the state line because why wouldn't you? Didn't make any sense to sit there in deep blue Oregon and suffer. And so I decided, okay, I'm going to run for city council. And I did, and I ended up becoming the mayor of Baker City. And we flipped that town's council from blue to red. Now, it's like, yay! So what we did at the time is push back a little bit harder than that, because the more I listened to Kate Brown and her people, her appointed bureaucrats on all of these boards and commissions, the angrier I got. I authored a resolution, and the resolution, the media called it the Common Sense Sanctuary. But what it really was doing was declaring a crisis against what our government was doing to our small community. Now, in Northeast Oregon, we had had maybe half a dozen folks die with COVID, and I say with COVID, not of COVID. One example comes to mind. We had an elderly gentleman who was up on a ladder doing repair work, 7 feet up in the air, fell down, hit his head, broke his neck, and he was diagnosed as one of our COVID deaths. Doesn't make sense. I started noticing on the city budgets, they were saying the deaths were increasing in our area, but the income and the revenue from our cemetery had not increased. Why was that? We were not being impacted in the way our governor was saying that we were, and we needed to open up. So when I became mayor, we passed this resolution, and it declared a crisis on mental health, economics, financial, all the way across. We had 3 young men commit suicide in the week that I was elected mayor. This is very abnormal for a town the size of 10,000. National media picked this up, and they ran with it, and I ended up on Fox News. And the groundswell of requests from people across my state saying, can you please run for governor, grew and grew and grew. You couldn't get any more grassroots than my candidacy. I came from a cattle ranch running a small business, and here I am, and I decided to run for governor. And there are some things that I did well on instincts and some things that I could have used a little bit of help with if I had known David and Corey at the time. So I hit the ground running, and we had a network across all 36 counties. We worked social media. We worked things on the ground, boots on the ground, more than any establishment swamp creature is ever going to attempt to do, because I was doing this not for a title, but because I loved my state, I loved my county, and I wanted to make a difference. And so I was out there constantly, and I thought, okay, if I can just work a little bit harder than the other candidates, see more people, do more, and run a campaign like they hadn't seen before, maybe we could take this state. And I worked it constantly, and I was doing very well up until the swamp kicked in. And so right about a month before the primary, here's where my media story happens. So I knew at the time that Oregon was very divided between blue and red. We were very polarized, but most of our counties were red, and the high population counties around the Portland-Salem area are mostly blue, deep blue. And so I decided to look at my people, look at what each area wanted, and I knew for an absolute fact, based on our voting numbers out there, that if a moderate milquetoast candidate got through that primary, we were going to lose the general election and we would lose the governor's seat to a Democrat again. Because the people in my congressional district are conservative, and they sit on their ballots and they don't turn them in for someone who comes from the establishment. And so we needed a grassroots candidate more than anything at that point. And so the debates were coming up. And at that point, I had been doing more with about $1 for every $5 my competition had been spending. So I knew that I was being effective out on the ground. Here's where this comes in, the media. We went into a media blackout with my campaign, and here's how that looked. The media decided to set some goalposts, or some goals, and the goalposts kept moving along the line. The first one was, have to have $100,000 in donations come in if you want to make the debate stage. Great, I met that. I had $5, $10, $100 donations, and we met that when it came in. They changed the goalpost again. Okay, 1,000 separate individual donors. Made that. Had to do well in this poll. Did that. They kept moving it. Well, take away the in-kind donations. Those don't count in your 1,000. Fine. I met that as well. So I was still on that debate stage a month before the votes would happen. They made one final move of that goalpost. And that move was, okay, we're going to depend on a poll, and that poll is what's going to determine who makes the debate stage. So there's a lobbyist in Oregon, and this lobbyist happens to own a polling company. This lobbyist also happened to only donate to the Democrats or to one of my opponents on the Republican side. So you can see where this is going, right? The poll was done with maybe 150 people polled within a couple hours statewide. We had some evidence that people were called ahead of time and pre-screened on their responses. I know one individual personally who was argued with on the phone when he said that, yes, I would vote for Kerry. And so that I was barred from the debate stage. And that's how that exactly went down. And at the minute that happened, I knew that we had lost not only the general election that the Democrat was going to win. And that's the most frustrating part right there. That's why we need heavy hitters to run a boot camp, to come in and network, to do something for grassroots candidates, because that's the point where I had been running on instinct and the knowledge I had and done well up to that point, but I needed resources to come in at the grassroots level and help. We could have flipped that state red if we had been a little more organized and a little more focused. And so we did. We went on to lose the general election. And my message to you today is that it is so important to recruit good, solid, principled grassroots people and get behind them. Because if you're coming from the swamp and you're an establishment politician, you're looking for that title. You're looking for power and influence. You're not looking to save your family. You're not the mama bears out there fighting for your children. You're not the people fighting for small business. The grassroots absolutely is. And so when David and Corey stand here and talk about supporting and finding viable grassroots candidates, that's exactly what we need to do and what Republicans overseas can help with. So please support this organization if you can. Thank you very much.
Kerry. If there are one or two questions, we have time for some very quick questions for Kerry, if there are any.
Do you have any questions? Nope.
How much were you able to raise? How did you find raising money for your campaign?
It's always tough in Oregon. I think I was somewhere over 300 and something thousand. Yeah. But Oregon's tough, you know, and being a blue state, I disagree with the point that only the swing states are where we should focus. Because if we focus on our deep blue states, we could start making them a little less deep blue and swing them eventually. If we abandon these states, then people flee these states. That spread of liberalism is just going to spread state to state to state. We have to draw the line and hold it somewhere.
I was just wondering that since you had to have a certain number of people donate to your campaign, and Oregon is, typically such a blue, how did you physically, what were your methods to get the different numbers of people to donate?
I was heavily on social media, and I was heavily boots on the ground, county to county to county. We had some of these candidates who actually did not even get out to the majority of the counties. You know, they came out and they did one or two events in the entire season and did nothing. So my theory was if I worked just a little bit harder and got out there, I could do it. But I'll tell you, the media blackout was so extreme in Oregon. On election night during my watch party, they would put the establishment candidates' photos up on the screen, and when the number counts would come in and flip back and forth, and I'd come up second place or third place, they would keep the establishment candidates on there and not mention my name. I ended up at the end of this race winning the second largest number of counties, if you look at it that way, in the state. I took the entire eastern half of the state of Oregon. That's never been mentioned. My name has never been mentioned again. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Kerry. A pleasure listening to you. And now we will move on to the next panel.
Sounds good. Thank you.